The hunts were called off on rainy nights. Duress didn't care for the rain. Perhaps this was a vestigial trace of his people's dislike for running water. He certainly didn't fear the cold and the damp. The hunger was constant, and on rainy nights, Duress would go without. Once it rained for 9 days straight. Duress thought he would shrivel up and waste away. He was even almost too weak to go through with the life-sustaining hunt on the 10th day, that first clear night. This is the way it has always been, he would think to himself. The hunters followed the prey. It was in their nature. Just as the inevitability of the kill and the constant hunger plagued Duress and his people throughout the ages, those same forces had plagued the fringes of humanity, the prey. It is not fair that they should multiply and that we should dwindle, he would curse out loud. He was alone in a city teeming with weak and sniveling prey. It should be the other way around. His brethren, the vampire, should rule the planet in towering cities of eternal night. In this dark utopia, humans, weak, cowardly cattle, would be farmed. They would exist in a station befitting of their nature, and Duress would rise to a station befitting of his own. He fancied himself a leader, a killer, a king. When he would hunt in one of his moods, he would go overboard. In the killing glee, he would lose himself in how vulgar and primal it was. He was the pinnacle of strength and dominance, and his prey was screaming, convulsing, trying desperately and futilely to escape. Though Duress did not know it, the scientific term for what he was doing is surplus killing, when a predator kills more prey than it has a use for. The semantics were irrelevant. Duress was on a murderous spree. He was charged by his animalistic needs and by his utter disdain for the human race. As much as Duress saw every aspect of a god within himself, he was not invincible. Even in the most crowded and prey-rich cities, he moved around a lot. His bloody and excessive habits would attract the attention of those sheepdogs that walked among the sheep. If they caught up with him, things could get complicated for Duress. Short-sighted and impulsive as he was, the vampire that languished in opulent penthouses and spacious lofts knew how to calculate his risk. Posing as an eccentric day trader and hedge fund manager, Duress went by the name Donald Witherspoon when interacting with his abhorrent prey. Using his high-powered profession as a reasonable explanation for wealth that had been accumulated over centuries, Donald Witherspoon walked unimpeded among the world of men. Claiming that he was shut up in his home office all day, Duress explained away his aversion to sunlight and his perpetual paleness. It was too easy, and it would have thrilled Duress if he hadn't been doing it for thousands of years. Perhaps the only thing Duress despised more than a human was a fellow vampire who sympathized with the frailty of the human condition. He had met several such compatriots, and they made his blood boil. While they attempted to find new and different ways to assuage the hunger and only hunted out of necessity, Duress relished learning every painstaking detail about the lives that he cut short. Duress loved the finesse of the hunt. He would learn his victims' names, their stories, and their deepest, darkest fears. He would earn their trust, then attack them while they were most vulnerable, first psychologically, then with his strength and his fangs. On rainy nights when he would call off the hunt, he would sit in his well-appointed apartment and recount some of his favorite kills. Stacy was a masterpiece. She was the caliber of prey that he longed for. There was no one else like Stacy. She had fallen in love with Donald Witherspoon, and it had been exquisite torture for Duress not to drain her dry the first night. Smitten, she divulged every aspect of her life until Duress could no longer bear it. He broke her down. Bringing her deepest fears to life before her, he slowly shattered every piece of Stacy that made her Stacy. She was in a sobbing, gibbering heap before him on his lush carpet. Idly, he wondered how difficult the material would be to clean. He could always tell a spurter, and Stacy was a spurter. It wasn't until he sunk his fangs into her deliciously warm neck that his terrible fixation reached its crescendo. By this point, Stacy's mind had completely gone. She wouldn't recognize her own parents if they were holding her birth certificate. It turned out that the carpet was impossible to clean. Stacy was a spurter, and Duress was happy to exchange a rug that cost as much as a sports car for such a glorious kill. He told the building super that he had been keeping dogs that got into a fight. $400 in the man's palm sold the story and suppressed any questions about the sheer quantity of crimson on the fluffy white carpet. He moved on to the next city at the end of the week. Now, almost 3 years later, Duress was convinced he had found another Stacy. Up until now, he had been merely going through the motions. There had been only one Stacy, and no number of squealing, draining humans clutching at their throats while their last breath escaped could quell his hunger for another Stacy. Her name was Cynthia, and she was a real beauty, a real prize. Here in her apartment, surrounded by her things, surrounded by the trappings of her life, Duress would celebrate her death.
What if I told you I had been hiding something about myself? A dark side. What if I'm a big bad wolf?
Duress, as Donald Witherspoon, asked Cynthia. I would say that I like taking a walk in the dark, Cynthia said, and she began sensually wrapping Duress's silk tie around her hand. Maybe I have a secret too, she said playfully.
Oh, pray tell.
Duress could wait no longer. She leaned in. Her tie-wrapped hand was pressed hard against his chest, and when she whispered in his ear, her tongue flitted across his lobe. I don't take kindly to wolves. Her voice was even and steady, with no traces of fear. Because I'm a sheepdog, motherfucker, and I protect my flock. The slender wooden stake she had concealed in her purse entered Duress's heart between two ribs with the practiced precision of a professional. Duress, who only breathed to fit in with his prey, exhaled sharply and genuinely. The last thing he saw, after nearly 3,000 years walking the globe, was the sneer of the prey woman he knew as Cynthia, fading into the blackness of the void.